A blessed evening to everyone. We will be starting tonight a new series entitled Covered, Living Under the God's Sovereignty. Covered, Living Under God's Sovereignty. And for the meditation this evening, we will be basing it in the book of Psalms. And we will be looking at the 91st Psalm, verses 1 to 16. Psalm 91, 1 to 16. It says here, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. For it is He who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His pinions, and under His wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and bulwark. You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, of the pestilence that stalks in darkness, or of the destructions that lays waste at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. For you have made the Lord my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place. No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. For He will give His angels charge concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. They will bear you up in their hands, that you do not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread upon the lion and cobra, the young lion and the serpent you will trample down. Because He has loved me, therefore I will deliver Him. I will set Him securely on high, because He has known my name. He will call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. With a long life I will satisfy him and let him see my salvation." May the good Lord bless the reading of His word. I observed recently that within the city of Zamboanga, there were several checkpoints that were set from time to time by our authorities. While it makes others feel that it is alarming to have those checkpoints, to have policemen checking us when we pass through the checkpoint. But to me personally, it makes me feel safe seeing the armed forces, the authorities, being so visible around. While these things are happening in the city, I suspect as well that one of the reasons why they do this several times this moment is the fact that since January up to the month of August, we experienced several killing incidents in our city. And there are many people who are so alarmed this matter because they feel that they are not safe anymore. Added to this is the conflict that is happening in those islands that China as well is interested about. Islands that are claimed as belonging to the Philippines, and yet the Chinese government is there trying to make some presence in that area of the sea. So these are conflicts that are happening around us that may possibly trigger a war. Well, these alarm people, don't you know that wars and killing incidents actually do not make it to the top reasons for mortality? While there are many individuals who worry about this probable war, the conflicts that are political in its nature in our city, there are many people that are so alarmed about this matter. But don't you know that when I visited the Philippine Statistics Authority's website, it gives us a list of the top reasons of mortality in our country. And you would be surprised. It doesn't have to do with wars and killing incidents. the top reason for death that Filipinos are experiencing, it's heart disease. I check if this is the case as well in the other parts of the world. So I look at the website of the CDC. This is a reliable website that would show us some information about the matter. And the data that I gather there is that it is so similar. Incidents such as killing, accidents would only fall around maybe fifth in its place as far as the leading causes of death from all over the world. Those reasons that fall at the top, all of them are physical infirmities. But here is a reality. Why am I saying these things to you? All of these things, whether we are alarmed about the war that are taking place or the rumors of war, accidents and killing incidents around, natural calamities, sicknesses, all of these things that are cause of mortality would show to us the vulnerability of human beings. While we are alive on this planet, you and I would remain vulnerable. And when we are confronted by one of these threats and realities, where shall we go to? Because the reality or the truth of the matter is that money cannot protect us from these things. There are rich people who were killed during the war. There were individuals who had more than 6 or 7 digits in their account that were declared dead during the pandemic. Money cannot totally protect us. Probably we have our own arms in the house. We have weapons. No, my friend, you can only be protected by those things if there are thieves that would get into your house. But if there is a sickness that would get into your house, no matter how high caliber your weapon is, it could never protect you. The psalmist who wrote this is so much aware about these realities that he's seeing around him. And added to that, not only the writer of this psalm, who is unknown, but as well the compiler of this psalm. Take note, the one who wrote this psalm is a different person from the one who compiled this piece and made it a part of the book of Psalms. The compiler of this psalm is so much aware of this matter as well. In fact, whenever they sang this song in the past, they usually use this song to commemorate what happened in 586 BC. What happened during that year? It was considered to be the end of the Davidic dynasty. What is that? When it says the end of the Davidic dynasty, it talks about the end of the reign of the kings after David. Because it was in the year 586 BC when the Babylonians invaded the southern kingdom of Israel and totally destroyed not only the political system of Israel, not only the kingdom that was established, but they destroyed even the territorial aspect of the Israelites. So when they look at the devastated land, when they look at the destructed political system, when the kings were all gone, they said it's the end of the Davidic dynasty and it's the end of everything. And whenever they commemorated that year, in the years after that moment, they thought of this as something that came into their lives to remind them that no matter how strong a kingdom would be, it would always remain vulnerable. Vulnerable against foreign invasions, vulnerable against natural calamities, vulnerable against pestilence, vulnerable of all these things that I have mentioned. So this serves as a reminder to the people who would sing this psalm as well, that we are all vulnerable, both collectively and individually. We are all vulnerable. That is why if you look at this psalm, this is truly a realistic and a good reminder for everyone. No matter what position we are in right now, no matter how influential we are in the society, no matter how strong we have built our family, no matter how strong is our armed forces as a nation, or is our bank account as a city or individually, we remain vulnerable. Because there is nothing on earth that can give 100% protection in all aspects of a human life. So the psalmist, knowing all of these realities surrounding him, is telling us that in the midst of all these realities, there is one person that we can go to, and He is God Himself. If we look at verse 1 and 2, the psalmist started this piece of poetry with this statement: "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge, my fortress, my God, in whom I trust." It's a reality that what we hold on to in the form of material things, in the form of a human being, somebody that we lean on when we have problems, all of this will not be able to give us 100% protection in all aspects of life. And yet the psalmist is saying, yes, this is true, but there is one person who can provide maximum protection for all of us, and that is my refuge, that is my God, my fortress, in whom I trust. Verses 1 and 2 is a declaration of the psalmist that God is his refuge, is his fortress, is his sanctuary. That God is his protector, that this God is called the Almighty, meaning He has all the power, He has all the capacity, He has all the ability to cover, to protect against any harm that could come into our lives. He can protect us. It was declared, a declaration by the psalmist. This declaration is affirmed by God Himself. I want us to look at the structure that I have looked at into this text. It is presented by the psalmist in a form of a chiastic structure. When I say chiastic structure, it comes in pairs. Verses 1 and 2 is paired with verses 14 to 16. What do verses 1 and 2 say? Verses 1 and 2, they are declaring that God is the fortress, the protector, the sanctuary that every person shall go to. So He is the ultimate protection. If you look at verses 14 and to 16, this is affirmed by God. Because when you look at these three verses, this was a statement that comes from God Himself. What did God say? Because He has loved me, therefore I will deliver him. I will set him securely on high. Because he has known my name, he will call upon me and will answer him and will be with him in trouble, and I will rescue and honor him with a long life. I will satisfy him and let him see my salvation. So verses 14 to 16 is an affirmation, God Himself declaring that He is indeed the divine protector of the psalmist. So both of them, the psalmist and God, agreed about the truth that is declared by the psalmist in verses 1 and 2. Going in the inner part of this chiastic structure, you would see now not a declaration but descriptions. Descriptions about God. What were these descriptions? In verses 3 to 6, God was described by the psalmist as the deliverer from the snare of the enemies and the deadly pestilence. Now, these two things, snare of the enemies and deadly pestilence, they represent something that come into our lives. Some calamity or catastrophe that is caused by human hands, human reasons, human initiation. But pestilence come not coming from the hands of men. Pestilence come out of nature. So both of these two things are coming into the people's lives, whether you are a believer or not. They would come to us, both caused by men and by nature. And yet in the midst of these two things, two sources of sufferings that human beings may experience, God remains to be the deliverer of both. The deliverer of human beings, of His people, from both calamities, may it be man-made or coming out of nature. Think about this. God is the one who is all-powerful, and yet He comes to us and say, I will deliver you. He is described as the deliverer. And His power can do in both sides or from both ends, man-made or natural calamities. Now let's proceed to the bottom part of this, the pair of the B plus there in the chiastic structure, the B minus. God is described as the protector and preserver of those who trust Him through His angels. He is described not only as a deliverer in verses 3 to 6, but now in verses 10 to 13, He is described as the protector and preserver. He is the one who does these things, and not only He does this directly, but sometimes He uses angels. Have you heard before somebody telling you when you were still young, you go there because God is going to protect you and will surround you with His angels? As we grow older, we rarely hear these lines being told to us. But this gives us a lot of reality in the spiritual realm. That in the unseen realm, something happens when we call upon the name of God. We perceive as reality what we just see around us with our naked eyes. It is visible, then it's a reality. But don't you know that there is an unseen realm that still remains real? Why did I believe in these matters? I believe because, number one, it is attested by the Scriptures. Second, there are testimonies that I receive that are attesting about what is claimed by the psalmist here when it tells that God protects and preserves using angels. When I went to Kentucky for my first residential experience with Asbury Theological Seminary, former missionaries here in the Philippines, the Reverend Otis and his wife, found out that there is a Filipino student in Asbury. So they searched for me. When they found a way to contact me, they asked me to have a meal with them. So we shared some stories and experiences that are happening here in Zamboanga today. And one of those peculiar testimonies that he shared to me was an experience of his fellow missionary. He said one time, one of the missionaries was abducted, brought by the rebels in an island. He was taken as a captive for several months already because the rebels were asking for millions from the U.S. government. Because the government did not respond right away. The negotiations went on, and this guy, this missionary, was really having a hard time while he was there kept inside a cage at the camp of the rebels. The missionary was thinking that it was going to be the end of his life. But he said to himself, Lord, if I will die in the mission field, if I will die preaching or proclaiming your gospel and your good news to this heathen, it is a noble death that I would experience. This guy was ready to die. He was really thinking that it's going to be the end of his life. But you know what? While he was inside a cage, he was surrounded by guards. There was one standing beside the cage who talked to him. When he was meditating one day, this person talked to him and said, "You are not going to die here." And this person said to him, "God sent me to tell you that you're not going to die here." This person held his hand. He was inside a cage. This person held his hand, pulled him out of the cage, and he was just amazed that he went through the railings of the cage. And this person grabbed his hand and led him away from the camp of the rebels. When they were away enough already, it was then when he realized that this person who grabbed his hand disappeared. And this missionary told me that I can never remember anybody in the scriptures that did similar thing to this than the angel that did to Peter when he was imprisoned. And it was an angel of God. And truly, he said, I believe in angels that were sent by God to set me free from the cage and from the camp of the rebels. I was telling Reverend Otis, you should have recorded this, written this down. He said there were a lot of stories that we experienced, personal testimonies that we could relate. Some of them were written down, but some remain to be passed on through oral tradition. But reality is that there are incidents that are happening like this, and I believe angels still are being sent by God even in our time today to protect His children. I received a story as well as a student in Ebenezer many years ago. One time there were pirates that were planning to invade Malagutay. They planned to invade Malagutay passing through the shoreline of Ebenezer. When they were approaching the beach of Ebenezer, these pirates were observed to have retreated. And weeks had passed. Some rumors were spread that one of the pirates testified as they were approaching the shoreline of Ebenezer, they saw tall white men glaring, holding swords and weapons, standing at the side of the shore. And when they saw these beings, they retreated because in the way they perceived them, they were so powerful for them to defeat. And so they retreated. When those individuals look at the beach, right at that time, they saw the pirates, but they never seen these big men that were described by the pirates. Who were they? There is an unseen realm that involves a lot of realities that we just don't see them. And I believe when a believer goes to the Lord and calls on the name of the Lord, there is something that happens in the spiritual realm unseen in our naked eyes, a reality that will be experienced by God's people. And this is what it is attested by the psalmist. God charges His angels to protect His people. Is there any weapon forged in this planet that can protect us from the powers of darkness in the spiritual realms? There is none. There is none. No matter how powerful is your gun in your house, when there are evil spirits lurking around the corners of your house, those weapons are irrelevant and useless. It is only God's mighty power, His mighty hands, and His authority that can command these angels to go to your place and protect you against the unseen powers of the devil. It is God only who can do that. So looking at the structure that is seen in this psalm, there was a declaration of the psalmist affirmed by God when he declared himself to be the protector. In the inner part of the chiastic structure, we see two descriptions of who God is. He is the divine deliverer from the snare of men, the enemies, and the deadly pestilence that may come. And for the second description, He is the God who protects and preserves through His angels. When you see a chiastic structure in a certain literary text or in a certain text, it would give us an understanding that the main idea or the central idea that the author is trying to convey is presented in the middle of it. What is stated in the middle of this psalm? Look at verses 7 to 9. 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. For you have made the Lord my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place. If I may summarize these three verses in one sentence, I shall say, you will see God's mighty hands at work because you have made Him your dwelling place. You will see the mighty hands of God. It says in verse 8, you will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked, meaning you would see the wonderful works of God's hands at work in your life and surrounding you. Why? Because you have made Him your dwelling place. Here is the truth that I want us to embrace. When we run to God as our sanctuary, as our dwelling place, He does not only keep us safe in His hands, but when we run to Him, He makes us a witness of the marvelous works of His hand. And this is so important. Why? In our culture, it is like a norm that I have observed around us, that when we experience a difficult time in life, often may it be caused by a man-made problem or it is caused by a natural calamity, we often feel that we have been victimized if we are in that kind of condition. You would hear someone say, I have been a victim of a scam. So it's a man-made issue and problem that came into your life, and you feel that you are a victim. When there is a relationship that you are in and another person, the one that you are related to, had another party, you feel that you are a victim. Whenever a calamity would come and it floods your area where your house is standing, you would feel that you are a victim of this natural calamity. Oftentimes, when there are difficult moments that we experience, we feel that we are a victim. But this kind of perception would entirely be changed when we run to God as our fortress. Because instead of thinking that we are a victim, when we go to God and seek refuge in His sanctuary, He turns us into witnesses, not a victim, but witnesses of the mighty works of the victor. I'll repeat. When we go and hide in the mighty wings of God, when we seek refuge in Him, He does not only keep us safe in His mighty hand, instead we shall never feel as victims. Why? Because He turns us as witnesses to the mighty works of His hand, the hand of the victor. Always remember that. Take note of this statement. When you see verse 1, God is declared as a shelter. When you see verse 2, verse 4, verse 9, it is described that He is a refuge, a fortress in verse 2. Somebody who covers us with His wings when we go to Him in verse 4. He is our shield. He is our bulwark. He is our dwelling place. And when we go to Him, there is 100% safety. But don't forget, there are times that God allows us to be affected by both man-made problems and natural calamity. As believers, we are not excused of these matters. Sometimes God allows us to go through these things. But when we go through these things, as we hide under the shadow of the Almighty, we shall never feel that we are victims. Because instead of feeling that we are victims, we begin to realize that we are witnesses of the mighty hands of the victor. Take note very carefully of this statement. Unless the feeble dwells in God, the eternal fortress, one will retain a self-perception of a victim. But when the weak hides in the shadow of God, one will begin to see the traces of His hands and will recognize the work of the victor. I'll repeat. Unless the feeble dwells in God, the eternal fortress, one will retain a self-perception of a victim. But when the weak hides in the shadow of God, one will begin to see the traces of His hands and will recognize the work of the victor. As believers, we would be sometimes placed under or subjected to the powers of darkness as they would come into our lives. We will be challenged. God sometimes allows it. Sometimes we become subjects to the issues and problems that natural calamities would bring. But take note, you are never a victim. When you are hiding under the wings of God, you are a witness to the mighty work of the victor. Just last week, I preached in a church at Coronadal, and the following day I started driving coming back to Zamboanga. One of the pastors in Pagadian texted me, and he said, "Pastor, I know you spoke yesterday in Coronadal, and I know that you are driving today, coming back to our place, to Zamboanga Peninsula. Surely you will pass through Pagadian. Why don't you drop by for a while? Because our CMT members are having a retreat, and I want you to drop by and preach to them. So it's an opportunity. I arrived there, took some moment of a little rest, few minutes of rest, and he introduced me and I spoke. And after which I got the chance to converse with the leaders of the church. And one of them was the wife of the late Reverend Guevara, an old lady who is so active in the ministry of God. In our conversation, I observed that all she told about were God's goodness and the power of God displayed in her life. The power of God displayed in empowering her, strengthening her day after day. The power of God that is at work in giving her wisdom as she speaks in several churches as well in different fellowships. The power of God and the work of the mighty hands of God in the way He provides for her needs. All of those things that she talked about were all about what God did in her life and what God is doing in her life. There is only one time that she mentioned about her husband. And that moment when she mentioned about her husband, she said, "When my husband died, God never left my side." That's the only time that he mentioned it. When my husband died, God never left my side. And as I was listening to her, I was so blessed. And I said, this woman truly has hidden himself in the shelter of God's wings. That despite the tragic moment of losing a spouse, she hid in the shadow of God and found herself witnessing the mighty works of God's hand. I myself can attest to that. In 1995, my father was shot to death. Two questions that came into my mind. First question, why him? There are more evil people around than him. In fact, I don't consider him as evil. He is so caring for the family. He provides well. He disciplines well. Why him? Second question, what will happen to us? Those questions that I asked in my mind were not rhetorical questions. They were real questions that I was confronted with that time. What will happen to us? You know why did I ask the second question? I asked the second question because in my perception, it's my father who provides for our needs. It's my father who works in order for us to be sent to school. It's my father who earns so that we will have enough food day after day, so that we will have clothes to wear when we go to school and when we attend parties and events. It is my father. Now he is gone. I felt that I was a victim. But right at that moment, the very scenario that came into my mind was our conversation. When one time my father looked into my eyes and said, "Why don't we have a Bible study?" And I told him we are busy with the business. So it did not pursue. As if he was so alive telling me, let's have a Bible study. When I recalled that scenario of our conversation, I stood up under a star apple tree and ran to the nearest church. Buti na lang ang nearest church was an Alliance church. Kay uglain nga church, basig didto ko nanuktok. So I ran to the nearest church, knocked at the door of the parsonage, and then Reverend Abelardo Obido, opened the door and he said, "Dong, what can I do for you?" And I said, "Please conduct a Bible study in our house." When the Bible study was conducted, it was then when we understood what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Yes, we lost my father, but we learned to seek refuge in God. And all throughout those years, God has proven me wrong with that question that I have asked in my mind. I lost my dad, but I have my Father in heaven, who is my refuge, my fortress, my sanctuary, and I run to Him and I am safe. The only thing that I see now as I look back at my past are the hands of God moving, and I can attest that to you because I experienced that myself. When we run to God, we are never a victim. In the hands of God, we are turned into witnesses of the mighty works of the hands of the victor. Let me repeat for the last time what I said earlier. Unless the feeble dwells in God, the eternal fortress, one will retain a self-perception of a victim. But when the weak hides in the shadow of God, one will begin to see the traces of his hands and will recognize the work of the victor. You stand by the side of God. You hide under the wings of the Almighty. You are not only kept safe, but at the same time, you are turned into a witness to see the marvelous works of his hand. Tell that story to others. God bless you and good evening.